Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second pre-show of the 60th anniversary season. You notice that I have with me the amazing Jonathan Church, and I would like to say welcome home.
Oh,
I think,
thank you.
more than anything else. And you notice, yes, thank you. And because it's Jonathan, I notice we've been given thrones. We normally have really rubbish seats, actually. No offence to the front of house and everybody else. So you know the drill. We're here to talk about the new production of The Murder on the Orient Express, which is going to have its press night tomorrow. We're going to chat for a bit as if you're not there, and then there'll be time for a few questions. Before we start, can I ask who has already seen the show? And who's going in this evening? Great. Do you want me to do the usual gag? Who hasn't bought a ticket? You know you love that gag. I do it every time. Okay, so, I mean, it's slightly different with this because most people know the story, but no spoilers.
Yeah, I was going to ask, does anybody not know who done it? Seriously, is there anybody who doesn't?
Okay, all right.
Very good.
We're not going to give anything away
No.
about anything. So this is going to be a brief chat. No, it's not going to be a brief chat. So, yes, welcome home. I suppose the first thing, I wouldn't normally be asking a director this, but is it weird to be back here, or is it just normal?
Oh, it's very interesting because you rarely, as an artistic director, go back and work in a theatre that you've run. I think, yeah, this is the first time I've done that in 20 odd years of running theatres. And it's felt remarkably like coming home. And I know it sounds odd. I think it's because Alan and I were here for so long, and that the refurbishment, normally when you go back to a building, it's changed. Literally physically changed, or the people have changed, or the audience have changed. But it feels like, in a good way, the things that have changed aren't as much as they would normally. So sitting in the foyer or sitting in the auditorium, it feels like it did when we left. And of course, because so many of the staff are there, Daniel has been an incredibly welcoming of me over the last few years. Kathy is back, so it just felt absolutely like putting on an old pair of jeans, which is great.
Which I won't.
I know. I'm good at old pairs of jeans.
Good old pairs of jeans. So in terms of this story, Murder on the Orient Express, with the one or two exceptions, it's in a way a challenge to make a story that is so familiar, and a character such as Poirot, who has stepped out of the books into the world. Even people who've never read an Agatha Christie know the little Belgian detective with his moustache and, his cane and all of these things. So what attracted you to doing this? And tell us a little bit about how you make it yours and your production.
Yeah, well, there were several things that were attractive. I genuinely was, as a teenager, a lover of crime fiction. I understand why audiences love it. I'm also aware of how notoriously hard it is to do those things on stage. So of course, anybody, the challenge is part of the attraction, because you go, well, maybe I can. Funnily enough, the lovely late Stephen Pimlott once did I think it was a West End production of Then There Were None. And this Stephen was the most, erudite, literate. And I remember talking to the director, and I remember talking to him, and he said, I really think if you treat an Agatha Christie as you would any great play, it can be done brilliantly on stage. And so I've always had that in my memory. And of course, The Mousetrap, we forget, Richard Attenborough. Richard Attenborough famously, it's quite, go and see it now and have a good laugh, because things have, theatrecraft has changed, writing has changed. So it's like watching The Real Inspector Hound now.
Yes.
It's a kind of.
Do you know, I still haven't seen it. And how fanatical I am about Agatha Christie, but I still haven't seen it.
But it was a great director and taking seriously a great writer. So, a little bit of me goes, I want to try and crack how you do it. The second thing was this adaptation done by the brilliant writer, Ken Ludwig. Now, because a great writer had already found some ways to solve how you make an adaptation of this theatrical, it felt like a lot of the hard work of how you crack it had been done. So, Ken's been here and made changes along with Henry to his adaptation. So this is, you're genuinely seeing the first time this version's been done anywhere in the world, but it was based on Ken's original. So great piece of theatrical writing, a desire for a challenge. And of course, this space, it was very interesting, the idea of doing, again, because it seems impossible, how do you do something that's set in and outside a train on this stage? Because you can't bring a train on stage physically, because if you do, we tried it when we were designing it, half the audience can't see anything. So that, again, challenge all seemed very intriguing. So those are the reasons.
And of course, many people here, I'm sure, will remember Henry Goodman from Arturo Ui, which was one of the great productions of your time. And then obviously, yes, Prime Minister, he's been here. So you and Henry have worked together a fair bit. So you knew that he had a Poirot in him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Henry, this is my lockdown COVID joke. Henry and I, before lockdown, had literally started rehearsals for The Life of Galileo, which was going to be here. So, my quip about COVID is we went into COVID doing Brecht, we've come out doing Agatha Christie. But it's and the connection between, actually, the connection is two extraordinary leading central roles, and Henry is a master of tackling those, and also, we want to be part of the project of building audiences back, and so a popular project like this is at this moment feels a very good thing. But yeah, the idea of Henry doing this part, he's a masterful at getting under the skin of complex characters, from Arturo Ui to Richard III to Shylock. He's done it time and time again. So his involvement in this was, felt absolutely vital. And of course, his relationship with the audience here.
Yeah. And one of the things, which again, we won't talk about the detail, but this particular novel and adaptation, obviously, is almost unique in the Poirot stories, bar the last novel, Curtain, which has a similar issue. So there is a complexity to this story that is not there in a lot of the others, where it is actually very straightforward, whodunit, justice has got to be served, and it follows that arc. This is different. Yeah,
again, I think that's what attracted both Ken and Henry to this story, is there is a final, for Poirot, moral complexity beyond solving the crime. Now, actually, Agatha Christie doesn't really dwell on that. She lets the audience think about that, but also she uses it as a kind of brilliant literary conjuring trick to surprise you. But what, again, were she writing now with all, we all think about people's psychology in a very different way. I think she would want to delve into that. And so that's what Ken and Henry have done. And again, one of the theatrical attractions is you get a chance to see the character we know and love through a different lens.
Yes, and I mean, one of the things that I must say that I loved about the production, apart from the sheer gorgeousness, which you are going to see, you and I sitting here is not giving any sense of quite how glorious.
But we've hidden it from the.
Yes, indeed, quite deliberately, and and all of these things. But in terms of some of the way that the estate is trying to make Agatha Christie not palatable, but attractive to a new audience, is actually taking the stories much darker and much more modern than personally I think they should be, because she was a woman of her time and wrote within that context. What I love about this is that it is 1934. It feels that. You're not making clever comments from the outside. You've immersed it in its period. Now, was that always going to be the case, or is that how Ken wanted it to be done?
No, I think, I mean, Ken's fascinating. Ken's writing, because he has a flair for language anyway and has done great books for musicals, has a natural sense of period that is built into the DNA of it. I don't think part of why this novel is so successful, I think, like Death on the Nile, it is the glamour of the setting, and of course the Orient Express ran for years later, but it felt it's part of what makes this attractive. So I think we always felt, just responding to the adaptation and sitting with Rob designing it, that's the way we wanted to present it, and that an audience would want to see those beautiful costumes, and because it could be fun relocating it, but I don't honestly know what you'd gain, and particularly in this, there's a reference to it in the final speech, particularly for Poirot, and that moral dilemma in this period close to the war. There's a whole set of sort of undercurrents that, for me, it would be perverse to move it out of its time.
And more than almost, as you know, I read all of Agatha Christie pretty much every year. It's, and I read the whole lot. I read 260 detective stories during lockdown. So all of the Agatha Christie again. But the thing that is interesting about this one as well is that more than almost any other of her book, it was inspired partly by a real life case. And mostly that isn't the case with Christie. So there's an honouring of that as well, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's right. But no, it feel, it's also, it's selfish, isn't it? You want to see the characters as you saw them when you read them, and so you want to see that, just part of the fun of the puzzle.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that is so exciting is the way that you do create a sense that we are on a train, that the stage feels huge and appropriate, but at the same time, that sense that when you're walking down a corridor, you might have to slightly breathe in to get past somebody. So as you worked on the design and you realised that you couldn't put a whole train on the stage because nobody would be able to see, and the carriages and things, how did that change how you were directing people? Because they're quite often, a train is a long, thin thing, shall we say?
Yeah, and this is this stage, of course, is the opposite of that. I mean, you'll see it. I don't think it's giving anything away. That what we also decided was, if you were doing this in a small proscenium theatre, you might be able to, which some of the films do brilliantly, keep that sense of claustrophobia. What we've done in our design is gone, and again, we hope this helps make it theatrical rather than filmic. Or we start with trying to explain the logic, whose compartment's next to who's the confinement. We do that, but as we progress through the story, we've made the choice to forget about the naturalism of that, and it slowly explodes, and so that we can stage the emotional twists and turns, the final scene where Poirot gathers all the suspects together. So we can stage that theatrically and richly without going, how do you do that if you're in a dining car that's 9 feet wide, and give access to. So we've just taken a genuine theatrical. There's also moments where we have to switch to. You'll see when you see. You have to switch to somebody on a radio doing a telephone call, a radio call with Zagreb. We, in the fluid playing of a show like this on stage, don't want to have to wheel a whole new set on. So we were making genuinely sort of non-naturalistic decisions, which affect the way you look at it. But actually, in terms of your question in terms of how you direct it, I hope it's about amplifying what's going on, rather than by keeping it natural, keeping it tight and, to my mind, non-theatrical.
Yes, because it's both. It's incredibly clever how you do that. The thing that really surprised me, and again, I don't think this is giving anything away, is that it is in many ways very funny. And I wasn't expecting that, actually.
This is Ken. I mean, I think this is Ken's gift. Ken's a brilliant comic writer, and again, because there's a line, and I think it's a Christie line, but it's certainly a Ken Ludwig line. But he talks about the passengers. He right from the beginning smells that there's something wrong about this group of people, and he talks there's a line in the play about it's like a Picasso painting with things in the wrong place. Ken has taken that to allow the characters to have a theatrical energy that does allow you to be amused by them, to laugh with them. And it's a great, it provides great theatrical energy, because what we also discovered, to be honest, the examining of a body, and there is a scene where there's the examining of the body, we know those in filmic, televisual terms, they're brilliant, or in a book. Funnily, on an arena stage like this, you can't see the knife wound or the pair of tweezers that Henry is examining them. So what Ken's done is, by using a theatrical engine of allowing comedy into it, particularly for those characters, he's just enabled us to have a different view. And and again, a lot of the telly and film adaptations don't allow the characters to be that. No. They're always flamboyant, they've all got strange accents, but he's built that into something that I think allows a very theatrical connection with an audience that of course, then tightens and changes as we get deeper into the plot.
I loved the fact that it felt much more authentically Christie, because I think some of the as I've said before, I think some of the recent adaptations are a very long way from Christie. Actually, it's the same story, but without the same tone or the same kind of moral universe, which was quite precise. And so I felt it was really good fun, although as it got darker as it went on.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because it is delicious reading those books, but you know this, having just adapted a book. What's delicious in a book? Because you have the time to suck people in and you can't do the same deliciousness. So what Ken's done is given us a different treat. It's a very quick way of providing a celebration of those characters and their quirks and their backgrounds. But it's a far quicker, more recognisable way of getting in.
But in fact, he's made. Again, that's the point about adaptation, of course, and we all have to do this, lose a lot of people. But in fact, he's made a big decision in a way that there's always a lot of suspects in Christie, but he's made a decision to not have all of them.
Yes, and I think if Ken would probably be very honest, that there's two reasons for that. One is you want to it's easier to keep track of 8 people rather than 12 as suspects. Also, as an author, you'll appreciate that he thinks the adaptation is more likely to be done in the future if it doesn't have too many in the company, which is, both good for him, good for the Christie estate, and good for the theatres that put it on. So a kind of blend of the artistic and the practical.
But the everything, you've mentioned, Robin, the design in the first place, and that you quite quickly realised that you were going to have to be slightly, very theatrical, but imaginative in the way that you did that. But I think one of the things that you do so beautifully is, it starts in Istanbul. I won't say where it actually starts because that is a spoiler. But the first big scene is in Istanbul. So that sense of travelling, that Christie loves so much, for being in other parts of the world and then being stuck. That's a really big challenge, because they're in one place which is very beautiful, in a lovely dining room and all of this, and then suddenly they're in snowdrifts in the middle of Europe in the winter.
Yep.
And so in terms of the way that you just had the progress of the play, you had Henry as your first person. Did you then put the creative team together and then found the rest of the company? Which is the order that you did it in?
It started with Rob and Henry. So design, the designer, I always think, everybody can celebrate a design. It always feels the designer is the first person who actually really does their hard work. An actor will start researching, a director will start researching, but the person who literally first puts pen to paper and starts defining what they're doing. I get the lovely thing of once the design's finished and once we've got the whole company of actors together, I get to sit in a room and play for 5 weeks and work out what it is. The designer has to commit. I mean, I think it's why I'd never be an author. An author has to sit down and actually write. I would never have the kind of discipline or bravery to do that. So I think it's like the scout. I always think the designer's the first. After the writer, the designer's the next one who actually has to do it. So it was Rob, Henry, and then the team grew kind of in parallel in both sides, grew from
there's a
there.
Beautiful soundscape.
Oh, well, amazing. Again, we talked a lot about, theatrically, how you, for the audience, do what you can't do easily on the stage. In film, you can, it's very easy to conjure up Istanbul, a train journey, when a suspect's being questioned, see the bead of sweat on their forehead. You can't do any of that at a distance. So what the music and soundscape, and two, we've got Chris and Adrian who've done the sound and music, absolute geniuses. They've been able to transport us from Istanbul to a train station into a train journey, and at times amplify what we're meant to feel, the joy of travel, the fear of a moment, the surprise, so I hope you'll appreciate that. But again, theatrically, the sound is a really big tool to help guide, support, surprise, and really important part of it.
Does it feel particularly nerve-wracking when you're dealing with an icon like Poirot? In terms of most people will have their own idea of him.
I think if Henry said this, I'm sure if you asked Henry this, he'd have another view. I think the burden of that falls more heavily on his shoulders. But Henry, has played, a series of, from Yes Prime Minister to Arturo to Richard III. Great. He's trodden in the shoes of great actors, and I always think, Henry said this on an interview. I think he brilliantly acknowledges that there are great things that other actors have done and things that audiences expect, and you want to take, and of course most of that comes from Christie. Yeah. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if any of you saw the Malkovich Poirot, which for me, there were lots of interesting things about it, but it threw the baby too far out with the bathwater. So the character that I'd read wasn't there. And I think Henry's approach has been to make sure that some of the things that you as an audience are familiar with are contained and honour Christie. But he's looked for other things that might not have been amplified by other actors, but also the very act of having to present it on a stage requires a different sort of energy. Some of the brilliant choices that have been made by previous Poirots on film require an intimacy and aren't going to drive a plot or play to 1,300 people. So I think he's really brilliantly combined his view of the character, some bits from Christie that I haven't seen in other actors. He'd had to choose the moustache, and chose to. It's basically he's grown it, and it might have a little bit of doctoring as well, but it's not the full stick on.
Yeah.
And I think that that even that choice is different.
Yes, because more than probably, Agatha Christie is the biggest selling novelist in the history of ever. and the estimates vary, but the highest estimates are 4 billion copies. So it's just like mind-boggling. But therefore, and there are 77, 79 novels and short story collections, and Poirot's in a lot of them, obviously. I'm a Miss Marple girl, as you know, and there's only 12 of those, which is very sad for us. But all the clues to the character, more than almost any other adaptation, are in a whole range of books. So, what do you take and what do you not?
Well, also some of them are a bit contradictory, like any great writer. The moustache isn't always described in the same way.
No, and I can't remember which one it is when a character's eyes change colour after about 30 pages, because Christie sometimes wrote 3 novels a year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite extraordinary, and she didn't make a fuss. She did them and gave them in, and then went on to the next thing. In terms of, I'm going to go to the audience for some questions in a moment. It is so luscious, this production. Everybody wants the clothes, whoever they are, whatever age they are, and to be part of that world. But I think you entirely escape it ever feeling nostalgic, which I think is so important, because it is actually a pretty tough story at the heart of it.
That's it. Thank you. I like that. I'll use that when I'm talking about. But I think it's built into the nature of the writing. I think the energy of the written word within it is tighter and tougher, which means it doesn't feel nostalgic. But also, there's an extraordinary company. They all bring incredible kind of wit, dynamic energy, precision, and when needed, weight. So I think, there's a lot of things that I think play into it not feeling nostalgic. And you know this, I've always felt these thrust stages automatically modernise something.
Yeah.
And I, it took me a while to realise it. It was the transfer of the wonderful double bill. It was the Rattigan and the David Hare and the Minerva. The Rattigan, when we put it in the West End, felt fustier and older, and
did it?
Just because it suddenly was, you were looking at it through a bit of cake icing on a proscenium, and you were distanced from it. The very nature of it being on a thrust made it feel more modern and fresh. And I know that sounds odd, but you're just viewing it in a completely different way.
Yes, and also there's a great deal of energy, as you say, on the stage, particularly in the final scenes when we're in the final scenes.
In the final scenes.
But the audience is very close to people's expressions, particularly, which I think you become, what I loved was there was a lot of laughter, and then in the final 20 minutes, you could have heard a pin drop, because it's like, what's happened? And I think half the audience knows the answer. So that is incredible, really. Do you fancy another Christie?
Oh, that's very interesting. Ken and I have, of course, been fantasising about it. Well, you should do a Miss Marple. That's
well. Funny you should say that. I have written a Miss Marple short story. They've commissioned 12 writers to do a new Miss Marple story each, which comes out in September. And of course, now I've got the playwriting bug. So
Well, there we go. There we go. You heard it first here.
Yeah.
Daniel, are you?
Run away.
But actually, it was very exciting. The Christie estate were in yesterday.
Oh, were they?
And they seemed very happy, which is good. No, that was good. But Ken and I have been fantasising about what might be, because of course I think Ken had a choice of which he adapted, and he brilliantly chose this for all sorts of reasons. So we've begun a conversation about, of course, you could go the next hardest to stage, or even harder is Death on the Nile, but maybe not, because the characters aren't necessarily as interesting, or the dilemma as complex. So we're busy dreaming. So any suggestions?
Yeah. Well, you heard that here first as well. So this has been quite an evening.